My mother-in-law, Patricia, sat across from me at the kitchen table, her tea untouched, telling me in that calm, condescending voice she always used that I should stay quiet and forgive him for the sake of the family. She had just learned, secondhand through her son Mark, that I had discovered his affair with a woman from his gym, and instead of comforting me, her first instinct was damage control for her precious son's reputation. She talked about how marriages go through phases, how men sometimes stray but always come back, as if infidelity were simply whether to be endured rather than a choice someone makes. I sat there nodding occasionally, letting her believe her words were landing, while internally I was already several steps ahead of everything she assumed I didn't know. What Patricia didn't realize was that I had discovered the affair 3 weeks earlier, not through suspicion or gut feeling, but through a voicemail Mark had accidentally left on our home phone, instead of cell, a slip that revealed everything in his own voice, tender and familiar in a way he'd never sounded with me in years. I had listened to it 4 times that first night, sitting alone in our bedroom, before deciding I wasn't going to confront him impulsively. Instead, I quietly began documenting everything. Screenshots of messages I found when he left his laptop unlocked, timestamps of nights he claimed to be at poker with the guys, receipts for restaurants I'd never been taken to in our entire marriage. By the time Patricia sat me down for her little lecture about staying quiet, I had already spent 3 weeks building a case far more thorough than she could have imagined, recording 2 conversations where Mark admitted details about the affair while trying to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting to things that weren't a big deal. I had also already met with a divorce attorney recommended by a co-worker, someone known specifically for handling cases involving hidden assets, because Mark came from money, and I suspected correctly that he and his family might try to make my exit from the marriage as financially painful as possible. Patricia continued her speech, mentioning how no man is perfect and how I should think about what I'd be giving up if I left, subtly reminding me of the lifestyle, the family name, the social standing that came with being married into their family. She clearly believed I was emotionally fragile enough to be talked into silence, the same way, I later learned, she had quietly tolerated her own husband's infidelities decades earlier for the sake of appearances. I let her finish completely, nodding along, before calmly telling her that I appreciated her perspective but had already called a lawyer that morning. The same morning Mark thought I was simply taking some time to think things over. The shift in her expression was immediate and almost comical, confidence draining into visible alarm as she realized I wasn't the passive, easily controlled daughter-in-law she'd assumed I was for the past 6 years. She tried backpedaling, suggesting maybe we could work through this privately within the family, instead of involving lawyers, clearly more concerned about scandal and reputation than my actual well-being or the integrity of her son's marriage. I told her plainly that the recordings I had, combined with financial documentation showing money funneled toward an apartment Mark had secretly rented for his affair, made privacy within the family no longer an option I was willing to consider. When Mark finally came home that evening, completely unaware his mother had already inadvertently confirmed for him that I knew everything, I watched him attempt the same performance she had rehearsed earlier, apologies layered with excuses about stress, about feeling unappreciated, about how this wasn't really about me. I let him talk himself into a corner before sliding the folder across the table, transcript of his own voicemail, screenshots, receipts, and the address of the apartment he thought I knew nothing about. His face went pale in a way that told me he finally understood the conversation with his mother hadn't gone the way either of them expected. What followed wasn't a screaming match or dramatic confrontation, because I had nothing left to discover in the moment. Everything had already been laid bare through careful, quiet preparation over 3 weeks. I simply told him the divorce papers would be filed by the end of the week, that the apartment lease and its payment trail would be presented as evidence of intentional deception involving marital funds, and that any attempt by his family to pressure me into silence would only strengthen my position rather than weaken it. He sat there stunned, realizing the woman he assumed would crumble quietly under his mother's influence had instead been building an exit strategy with the precision of someone who refused to be controlled. The following months involved exactly the kind of family pressure I had anticipated. Distant relatives suddenly calling to check in. Old family friends suggesting I was being too harsh for someone who had simply made a mistake. But none of it shook the resolve I'd built during those 3 quiet weeks of preparation, because I understood something they didn't, That silence in these situations rarely protects a betrayed person. It only protects the one who betrayed them. Patricia stopped calling eventually, perhaps realizing her attempt to manage the situation had backfired the moment she underestimated exactly how prepared I already was. The financial settlement reflected everything I had documented: the apartment, the gifts purchased with shared funds, months of dinners and getaways funded by money that should have gone toward our actual life together. Mark's family, despite their resources and connections, found themselves unable to argue against evidence collected with such methodical patience, and the case settled faster than anyone, including my own lawyer, initially expected. I walked away not just with financial security, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had never once given Patricia or Mark the reaction they were both counting on to control the outcome. Looking back, I think about that conversation with Patricia often. How confidently she assumed forgiveness and silence were my only available options. How completely she misjudged the woman sitting across from her drinking lukewarm tea. People who ask for your silence usually do so because they understand, somewhere beneath their performance of concern, exactly how much that silence protects them rather than you. I learned that real strength in betrayal isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, patient, and devastatingly thorough. The kind of strength that lets you walk into a confrontation already 3 steps ahead of everyone who assumed you'd never notice at all.